3 days before a vaccine mandate was set to take effect for truck drivers crossing into Canada, the federal government seemed to back down on that requirement late last night. Then, this afternoon, another reversal. The feds now sticking to their original rules, which will force Canadian truckers coming into Canada to be fully vaccinated or face PCR testing and quarantine requirements. So how do truck drivers feel about this? And how will this impact the supply chain and food prices for Canadians? To discuss, we welcome Sylvain Laskowski, the president of the Ontario Trucking Association, and Sylvain Charlebois, the senior director for the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Thanks to you both for making time for us. Stephen, let's start with you. What a roller coaster of a day for you and your members. What happened?
A lot. But I guess to get to the crux of it, we are where we started. And so the vaccine mandate will come into effect on Saturday for both Canadian and U.S. truckers entering back into Canada. And obviously next week we expect a mandate to go in at the United States border. So what we're in for is an exit of probably 10 to 16,000 truck drivers from the system, which represents anywhere between 10 and 15% of the 120,000 Canadians that cross the border.
This is either a policy flip-flop or a major communications nightmare or both. What happened here? Because yesterday the CBSA was pretty clear saying that truckers would be exempt, and then today the feds say, oh, that message was put out in error. What's your understanding of the situation?
I think that an error was made, and we'll leave it at that.
You're being diplomatic.
It's a term rarely said about me, but I think that's the best way to leave it at this point.
So how challenging is that to be on this roller coaster of we're going to be okay, the supply chain hopefully won't be so impacted, and now truckers are back to square one?
Well, here's where we won't be diplomatic. We've been consistent with this message that the issue of implementing the mandate in January, we've said from day one to both Washington and Ottawa, was not the time. It was always a question of if, not when, not if, pardon me. And so, both Ottawa and Washington appear not to heed our warnings. They are not heeding the warnings of other members of the supply chain, our customers. And we're about to understand those consequences on Saturday.
Sylvain, I promise I'll bring you in 1 second here. But Stephen, I've got one more question for you. Do you have a sense as to how many drivers remain unvaccinated in this country, and what does this mean for them?
Sure. Well, Beatrice, our industry is representative of Canadian society. So I think the average is around 85% in Canada and a little higher, a little lower, depending on the province you're in. And that's the vaccination rates we've seen with our members across Canada. Again, some higher, some lower. But at the end of the day, we're a reflection of Canadian society. And right now, about 15 to 16% of Canadian society isn't vaccinated. So we can expect at a minimum 10% of these drivers not to be vaccinated, because that's where we're probably headed as a society.
Sylvain, we heard Stephen say this timing is pretty terrible. How disruptive could this be to the supply chain?
I think we have every right to be concerned, to be honest. The border has remained open since the beginning of the pandemic. We've never seen a public health measure impacting the border until now. So this weekend will be a first, affecting truckers coming into Canada, and a week later, truckers going into the U.S. That border is critical. It's like allowing arteries in your body to allow the flow of blood all over the body so you can live. If you cut anything, if you disrupt that flow, that fluidity, you will end up seeing empty shelves, higher food prices, unfortunately, because on our side, we actually buy for well over $21 billion worth of food products U.S. every single year, and almost 70% of it actually goes through the border on wheels with truckers. And so there's a lot of business, and a lot of that business happens between November and March, which is why I actually agree with Stephen. This probably would be the worst time to do this. And yes, if a vaccine mandate is necessary, fine, but the timing is just not a good one.
The Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association said that this would really create a crisis at the border. I think a lot of people watching at home, when you say the shelves are going to be empty, Sylvain, that causes a lot of concern. So what does this mean for Canadian consumers?
Well, the other thing that has rarely been mentioned in the media is the oversight required to implement a policy like this. You have to screen everyone at the border, so it's going to slow things down. And when you slow things down with supply chains, it will end up costing more for consumers in the end. So we were expecting, with Canada's food price report, we were expecting food prices to go up by as much as 7% in 2022. This could actually put the inflation rate at a much higher level for 2022 as a result of this disruption, unfortunately.
What's going to cost more, Sylvain? What kinds of items are you predicting are going to, mean families have to shell out some more cash?
Well, you have to think about the cold chain. So I would say right now, produce, lots of grocery products as well will enter the Canadian market or won't enter the Canadian market. So it's going to create some rarity. I suspect that larger companies are going to do well because they probably have their own fleets. But the independent truckers out there are servicing key independent companies, family-owned companies. They're going to be looking for ingredients, and they won't be able to manufacture Canadian goods to service Canadians. And so if you actually take out all of these products, you're going to put some pressure on food prices across the board.
Stephen, I think the federal government thought this would be incentive for more truckers to go and get the vaccine. What does this mean, though, for the industry, one that's on a regular day already short thousands of workers?
So what's happened is the rationalization of limited commodities since the announcement. Yes, there was a thought by government by introducing that mandate that it would dramatically increase vaccination rates amongst the trucking industry. Has it had a positive impact? Yes, but nowhere near, I think, what they think would have come as a result of this mandate. So what is happening in the supply chain is that certain areas of that supply chain have been far more aggressive in securing transportation or truck transportation across the border beginning in January. And other sectors who have not been as aggressive will be left out in the cold. So what does that mean? That means that there'll be impacts throughout the supply chain, but some aspects of some sectors in the supply chain, will be impacted more negatively than others.
You've mentioned our American friends. Canada and the U.S. need to agree on something and fast. So what do Ottawa and Washington need to sit down and do, Stephen?
What they need to do is push this mandate into the future, work with members of the supply chain to understand the issues that were just recently raised about the nature of various supply chains, their peak periods, and how they can move forward with less truck transportation and pick a date that's smoother. Right now, the supply chain is very fragile. It needs more trucks, not less.
Listen, we've still got a couple days till this comes into effect. Let's see if the government changes its mind once again. Stephen Laskowski, Sylvain Charlebois, thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.